Most business owners think the key to success is just working harder. But after 35 years, founding 10 companies and exiting 7, I can tell you that is dead wrong. The key to scaling and selling for millions is that they follow a framework, the framework that I used to generate hundreds of millions in revenue and allowed me to sell my businesses when the time was ready. So if you're that bottleneck, you're that solopreneur that doesn't know how to grow and scale, stick with me because I'm going to show you the techniques and strategies I use to build high-performing sales teams.
Welcome to the Launch Capsule. With your host, James DuBos. Buckle up because your launch capsule begins now.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
This is Jim DuBos, and welcome to this episode of the Launch Capsule. Today, we're going to begin a multi-part series on growing your company through effective sales, leadership, and account management. I don't know how many parts of this series is going to be, but I'm going to make sure I walk through the strategy and techniques that I've used over my 35 years to grow companies year over year in a successful way. So let's get started. I want to make a few assumptions. First, that you're in a stable revenue moment, meaning you're out of startup mode, you have repeatable sales expectations, and you're hitting those expectations month over month. So there's no surprises. Your profitability, I have recurring monthly profitability that's been demonstrated hopefully over at least a 12-month period. I've got no surprises in that revenue profit in the last 6 months. Really, really important. The next would be you have a strong handle on your financials, meaning I have a recurring set of monthly reports. I'm reviewing my balance sheet, my income statement, my cash flow. The reports are accurate. They're on time. I have a dedicated moment each month where I review the results and compare them to the expectations that I set in my initial plan for the year. And lastly is cash flow. So is my cash flow positive? Do I have strong cash on hand? And do I have a debt service coverage ratio above 1.2? The reason this is important is because you have to be able to fund growth. Growth is going to cost you something in the beginning. It doesn't just happen. And so you need to make sure that you understand where is the capital going to come from to fund this growth. Okay, so in this first moment here, I would tell you that building a sales team is going to be the most critical thing for your growth. Now, if you are a solopreneur or a team, maybe you have partners in the business, and none of the partners are the sales leader in the business, that's something that you need to consider. If you don't have those sales skills inside the four walls of the ownership structure of the company, a person who is going to dedicate themselves to really growing and developing a sales team. So here's the strategy used to bring that into the business. First, found a very accomplished individual who had a high degree of success in our industry and had the skills to be able to execute both from an account management perspective, meaning they could successfully sell themselves, and with the long-term view of building a team around them. And so they would become less of an individual contributor and more of a team leader, a management structure to build out a bigger team of people carrying the revenue expectations for the company. So the way we did that was first built an individual contributor compensation package built around margin, not revenue, but around margin, compensated them for this margin they generated. So they received a commission. They had a base salary, and then they received a commission based upon their own individual production of sales. The second part of that was we added an equity component that allowed the individual to, quote unquote, earn into an equity position in the business that ultimately was capped at a certain percentage whenever they hit the gross margin number that we had set. So it was a way for them to, in effect, buy in or earn into the partnership, into the equity structure of the business based upon their own success. So we won as a group because we were growing our company and growing the revenue in the business. They were rewarded because they contributed to the success of the business and received some equity ownership in the business. So it was a win-win for all parties. I like to go back and say something about the leader you're hiring. People are going to take on that person's personality, their attitudes, their dispositions. So it's really critical that they display the personality, attitudes, and dispositions that you want in the company. So things like skills, the experiences that they've had in their journey, cultural fit, things like personality. Sales account team members, as you grow the team, are going to have certain personality characteristics that you're going to have to learn to deal with. Things like they can be selfish, they can be egotistical, they can be highly competitive. Those are all positive attributes as long as they don't become negatively focused internally inside against each other or inside the team. They also have generally high compensation expectations, which you want. You want to be able to demonstrate to them if you perform, you will be compensated very well. And so I think those are all healthy things. The second part of that dynamic is that there will be many, many times if you have a successful account team where they are being compensated more than you as the owner of the company. And that may be a concept that just drives some entrepreneurs crazy. But if you think about it, their contribution, because you own the lion's share of the equity, maybe you own all of it, or maybe a high percentage of it because you've rewarded them with equity ownership as they help you grow the revenue and margin in the business. Your value comes in the end when the exit occurs. So you're being paid, you're being compensated fairly along the way, but your real value and your real compensation moment comes in the end of the journey when you exit and are paid for the asset that you've built over time. Obviously, if you think about personal characteristics, you're looking for an A player who is not in management today, who's willing to continue to be an individual contributor and perform, but over time they want to transition out of that role and into the role of building a team. So they got to have persistence. They got to have great communication skills. They need to be adaptable. Those are all fundamental things. In terms of your interview process, what I generally recommend is make it structured and repeatable so that every candidate that comes through this process experiences the same thing. It also will help you measure those experiences as you go through it so that you get a consistent outcome. These are the strengths and weaknesses of each one of the candidates. If you don't have a big team, your circle of advisors can help you with some of the interviews. So when you get to a place where you think you've culled down to 2 or 3 individuals, I recommend that you ask your advisors, hey, would you help me and just interview them for these components, whatever that is. You need to talk in terms of their compensation being majority coming from a performance-based comp. So it keeps your out-of-pocket cash flow hit to a minimum. So I would tell you that the vast majority of account managers that are coming in are going to want some form of a base salary to help them cover things like insurances and just basic living expenses. But the majority of the compensation, it should come from the amount of margin that is generated in these transactions. The next component is you may not be in a full maturity level yet in your training and onboarding expectation because you're really just making this first hire. But you should have things like basic HR policy and documentation that is in place. And I would tell you, most of the entrepreneurs that I work with, we establish a basic operating procedure and process just to have that beginning method, if you will, of onboarding and training people. Over time, it'll become more important as you try to grow the team and service more customers and more employees. The next piece of this process is setting clear goals and performance expectations. And you aren't going to do this and shouldn't do this in a vacuum. You should do this with the candidates that you're interviewing and having conversations with, because you want to make sure that the goals you have make good financial sense and they're also achievable. So if we go back to our SMART methodology of specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and they're time bound. Those are the most important elements when you set these performance expectations. You want to track them according to a standardized schedule. Generally speaking, it's on a weekly and monthly basis, along with quarterly expectations, depending upon your business, because you may have, I'll say, seasonal elements to your business based upon your customer profile of when they spend money. I think you want to have a results-driven mentality, and you want it to be transparent. So that way, any decisions you make are driven by data and they're not subjective. They are data-driven. Typically, results-driven are the best way to maintain a transparent and healthy relationship. You're going to have an investment in technology. So you're going to have a sales process developed as you bring this individual on board for prospecting, qualifying, closing transactions. You'll need some form of a CRM, a customer relationship manager, to track the leads, the follow-ups, and any reporting based around the funnel itself. You want to try to think in terms of the customer experience at this moment and say, okay, what are the things that I can automate to make the administrative tasks to a minimum and maximize the selling time of the individuals that are involved. And then the last thing, you want to have an individual that is coachable, where you can have a team-oriented approach, what's working, what's not working, because you want a close relationship with this individual because they're going to fundamentally be responsible for developing and growing a team of account managers that are going to grow and develop the revenue and margin in your business. And so I think going back a little bit to this attitude of what is the culture you're trying to build. You want to build a culture of team, a team-oriented person. You want to have an attitude of a servant's heart. They exist to make others successful, not just themselves, but they exist to make others successful. And so if they get a sense of accomplishment from helping others achieve their goals, that's a great attribute. And they're willing, quite frankly, I like this word humility. They're willing to accept failure. They're willing to accept feedback, not to tear them down as an individual, but they accept that feedback as a way, okay, we can get better by doing X. What did we learn from this experience? I think failure is one of those things that none of us like to admit that we failed, but at the same time, failure is really when we learn. And so having the humility to look and go, okay, I didn't do that so well, or that didn't get me the outcome that I was expecting. What could I do different? I think that's a really key component in the overall development of the sales team. So this first episode, like I said, is really just talking about team and the building of the initial team. I'm going to get into some more concrete elements of this, but this is the beginning of the hiring and building of the sales rocket. So I really appreciate your time. I know that your time is the most valuable thing that you have. And every day we choose what we spend our time on. So I hope this was helpful to you. And until the next time, I'll see you in the next episode and have an awesome, awesome day.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Launch Capsule. With your host and mentor to success, James DuBos. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share.